Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. Uh, I'm Rebecca Olson. I'm Senior Programs Officer at Delaware Humanities. Rachel, if you want to introduce yourself.
My name is Rachel Ersh Sheffield. I am the program assistant, and I mostly specialize in our speakers program and soon to be our community conversations program.
So the two of us are the programs team. If any other DH staff are on, I can no longer see you in the Hollywood Square. So if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead. Otherwise, I will just keep talking. Um, So I see a lot of familiar names. A lot of you probably know, but I'll introduce Delaware Humanities anyway. We're Delaware Humanities. We are Delaware's state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are both a grant-making organization, giving grants to organizations engaged in humanities work in our state. And we also create programming that organizations can utilize. And as Rachel and I are the programs team, and you have signed up for the new programs preview, that's what we will be talking about today. So for this little session, we have two new programs to talk about today that we hope appeal to your interests and your organization's needs. We've launched a new program called Community Conversations, which was highlighted in the email invitation you probably received because you are here, unless you saw it in our newsletter. And we also have a new resource toolkit that looks at public history, specifically monuments and markers. So before I tell you specifically about those, I just want to highlight that these are both programs we've been able to develop thanks to a special NEH initiative called United We Stand, which granted funds to all the state humanities councils to create programming that combats prejudice, discrimination, and division in the US. That's part of a larger White House initiative aimed at combating hate-based violence through education and understanding. So both of the programs that we're highlighting today, we were able to create with the funding from that initiative. Thank you. Extra to the NEH. So just I'll lay out what we're going to do in this session so you know what our plan is for the time we have together here. We'll talk a bit about these new programs. I'll sort of talk at you for a little bit, and then we will move into a preview of one of our community conversations with one of our conversation leaders who is here and who I will introduce shortly. You will have several chances to ask questions about each program, and there will be time for a longer Q&A at the end of the session. If at any time you think of a question and you don't want to forget it, just drop it in the chat and we will make sure that we get to that question when we have Q&A time. So please feel free to be chatting in there. Before I talk about the toolkit for a little bit, anything anybody needs right now? Which, Rachel, I will need you to tell me because with my things open, I can't really see faces.
I think we're okay.
Great. Could you just share those couple slides?
You got it.
Perfect. Can folks see that okay? I hope so.
Nods. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'm just quickly going to talk about our first resource, which is a toolkit called Let's Talk About Monuments and Markers. And this toolkit is a packet that provides entry points for discussing historic monuments and markers and the controversies that often arise around them, especially in the last few years. So this is designed as both a resource for folks to learn more about that subject and as a guide for hosting an activity for audiences at your organization that helps them learn more and find some entry points into what is a difficult subject. So in that packet, there's some background information about monuments and markers, examples of controversies and creative solutions to those controversies from around the world, not just the US, and ways to engage with markers and monuments that you see in your own community or elsewhere in your travels. Next slide, Rachel. So the toolkit includes a printed packet and a PowerPoint presentation that you can use with small groups at your site, as well as a guided activity with a worksheet that your group can do together for some more hands-on learning. The activity asks them to look at the text of historic markers in Delaware and try their hand at writing their own markers. So that slide there just shows you a couple of sample pages from the packet. The first page where you can see there's instructions on how to use the packet, and that's going to start diving into talking about monuments and markers. Sorry, this got very tiny on my screen. The sample page of questions that you can ask yourself and guide your group to ask, or have them take home to ask of themselves when they see monuments and markers in their communities, in Delaware, in the US and beyond, of how to think about those entry points, like who made this monument? You know, when was it put here? Why was it put here? Who did the writing? Who did the design? Things to give you a starting point to learn more and to think about what was the meaning of this and how might we think about it now? And then that third page there is a sample of the worksheet from the activity portion where folks would provide the link. They can go online, look at Delaware Public Archives, very useful online collection of the historic markers in Delaware, engage with the text of those markers and think about what's there and what they might do differently if they were to write a marker in their own community. So that's just a couple pages from that packet. Next slide, Rachel. Oh, I put the questions bigger so I could see them. Great. So there are some of the sample questions from those smaller pages. Things to ask your group and have them ask themselves. Who created this site? What motivated people to create this site? What groups of people are represented in the marker? Whose stories might be left out of that site? And why is that marker placed in this location? So those are just some of the sample questions from the activity portion of that toolkit. We hope that through this toolkit, we can help both to provide some useful information on contemporary issues for organizations in Delaware, and that we're creating ready-to-use options for programs and activities that you can host. So if this sounds interesting, but you don't feel like you are ready or, you know, at this moment want to host the specific activity, that doesn't mean that it's not a great resource for your staff to use to then talk to folks or to learn more. You could host the activity rather than with the public with your staff. There are options, and there are also options for further learning in the packet. There's recommended documentaries, books, further activities you can do, options to engage more and to learn more. Just last thing, this resource is completely free, thanks to the funding from the United We Stand initiative. So if you would like a copy of this toolkit, we will mail it to you at no charge. All you have to do is fill out a request form, which we will be sending in the follow-up to today's session. Packets are being printed right now, so if you do request one, just give it a couple weeks to arrive. We're going to pause now if you have questions about this, and I realized I think I skipped one thing to tell you in the beginning, which is that we are going to send a follow-up to this session. Not only will the recording be accessible for folks who might want it, but we will send out links to the resources and how to request them, so you don't have to worry about scrambling to take notes now. We will follow up so you'll have everything you need. But any questions so far, we can pause now before we talk about the next program, which is the longer portion of this session. And Rachel, please tell me if there are people. Also, if not now, please drop them in the chat and we can address them later. You have plenty of time to think. No pressure to have a question ready.
All right, nothing's showing up in the chat, so I think we're okay.
Yeah, we will talk in the Q&A. Okay, so the next portion of this preview is about our community conversations. So some of you many of you, I can see by names, might be familiar with our speakers program, which brings a contained program with a trained professional to your site to engage your audience. Speakers programs are more lecture-based, a little traditional. This program is similar in that it sends a trained professional to your site, but it is centered on audience participation. So community conversations are really designed to get people talking to one another about important issues, and hope that those audiences reflect a bit on themselves, think about why do they hold the opinions that they hold, that maybe they'll share stories with their fellow participants, and find some common ground. So our conversation leaders participate in training to prepare them to engage with groups, and then we work with those conversation leaders to develop and hone conversation topics that speak to key issues in the US today. We currently have 3 conversations available, and we will be adding more to the catalog as we train more conversation leaders. The 3 we have right now are polarization, can we find common ground? Sitting with discomfort, self-kindness in a complicated world, and whose dream is it? Defining and participating in the American dream. And rather than me talk more at you about this, we have one of our conversation leaders here with us today who will be leading a preview of Whose Dream Is It? Defining and Participating in the American Dream. So I will kick this session over to him to introduce himself. We hope that you're willing to participate a little and talk with folks. If you can't turn your camera on right now because you're at work, please use the chat if you can. We will all do our best. So Rafi, the floor is yours.
Hello there. Obviously, I am Rafi Andonian, and I am one of the community conversation leaders here for Whose Dream Is It? Defining and Participating in the American Dream. I think the American dream is something that is defined in multiple ways over time, and of course defined in many ways by different people based on various lived experiences. So that's part of the reason that I enjoy this conversation, because I learn in the process as well. I don't have all the answers to the American dream, but in order for us to proceed, I want to get a sense of what you guys think of the American dream before I say just a little bit more about myself and why I'm interested in this topic. So if we could, can we please have each of you all introduce yourself, and what I want you to answer when you introduce yourself is to say, what is your impression of the American dream? If you could briefly tell us that, so we get a sense of what is in the, how we have come together here.
I'm happy to kick us off. And then I think, Rachel, I might ask you to call on people since we're a fair number here and it'll be hard for folks to make eye contact and see who's going. I already introduced myself, but I'm Rebecca. And gosh, it feels dated to me is a word that comes to mind.
Okay.
Darlene, would you like to go? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I think she's talking, but she's muted.
Not yet.
Can you unmute her? There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what you meant by the American dream. I can just give you what I think. And
Yep.
it seems like for the people that are, I have to bring in race, for the people that are like people of color, it seems like we have been left out of the American dream.
Okay.
All right, Jessica Redmond.
I'm Jessica. I was a former ESL teacher, English as a second language teacher, and I observed, and I also teach the American Dream in 10th grade, but I just have a comment on it in that I have students who came over and were kept in cages for a year and so on and so forth. And so their version of the American dream is different than their parents, because we also have some students who have been here. I had some students who had been here for a while, and they didn't really care about doing much more than playing video games. So they kind of have their parents have a different idea of what the American dream is than the students do.
David White.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm David. I volunteer with Lewis Public Library. My impression of the American dream is that since I believe the foundation of the American ideal and the American experiment is one in which the individual can set his or her own destiny. I'm not sure that that's the American dream that we were sold as children. And so I think that the program, the idea of an American dream is currently in flux.
Pat Newcomb.
Hello. I also am a volunteer with Lewis Public Library, sort of standing in for Rebecca today. My impression of the American dream is yes, that it is in flux. It has worked very well for certain folks. We have learned that it has not worked anywhere near as well for many folks. It's like the sign on your marker that says, whose story is left out. Mm-hmm. And so sadly, the American dream that was taught to me as a kid, although it's still alive, it doesn't include everybody.
Verdi.
Hi, my name is Verdi Lee, and I'm with the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs. So I think I come from a history background, and I think that when we think of the American dream, I think of the way that it's been used against different populations within our country. And so I think, though, today there's an opportunity to look at elements of that and to think about how we can apply equity to that. And so that's where I would come.
Mm-hmm. Amy Golden Shepherd.
Hi, Amy Golden Shepherd, HCA as well. For me, the American dream is about opportunity and true liberation, which we know is not accessible to all and has not been fully realized.
All right, Sierra.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sierra with Delaware Humanities. And I think my mind just jumps to the old stereotype of a house with a white picket fence, 2.5 children, which then I think in current times has a reflection of all the adjectives everyone has already said, like antiquated, inaccessible for some people, maybe not even desired by some people. So that's my thought.
And I guess to round us out, my name is Rachel. And I guess kind of to parrot what all of you guys are saying, yeah, it's this old idea, but at the same time, sometimes I feel like we kind of have to be grateful that these are our big problems and not that, most of us are not starving on a day-to-day basis, but at the same time, we can always be better. And I'm at least glad that we get to live in a country where we get to strive to be better.
All right, so what I did was I took notes as you guys were each talking, and I'm going to put them in the chat so we have them in front of us, so that I did a very brief few word kind of takeaway from each of your comments, so we have it in front of us and we don't forget it. Now, if we were doing this in person, I may, put this up on the board or on the wall, but since we're here virtually, I thought this would be a helpful way to have it in front of our face, the different definitions that you all put. Now, Darlene, I love what you said about you don't know what I mean by the American dream, and that's part of the reason I didn't want to talk a lot before letting you all talk, because I didn't want to influence and shape what you feel you have to say about the American dream or even how I define it. I would say, for me, having dealt with this quite a bit, all of these are elements that I think of in the American dream. I'm not sure if I believe in one American dream myself, and I don't want to shape how you think about it, but I want you to reflect on how and why you feel the way that you do, and maybe help understand each other a little better in the process. Now, real quick, to see the background I come from, I worked at various historic sites where the American dream was certainly contested. At the Gettysburg battlefield, which of course is a major Civil War battlefield after which Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, which sets forth some of the ideals of the country, including discussing, of course, the end of slavery. I worked also at the Martin Luther King home, and we're going to refer to him in a little bit briefly later in this conversation, because of course he defined, or he set forth a dream as he saw it. And I also worked in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the atomic bomb was created, and that certainly has its own set of, you were talking earlier, Rebecca, about contested historic sites, and that certainly has its own set of questions to consider as well, and the role of the United States in the global picture. And I do think of the American dream in a global sense as well. Certainly in a Cold War context, there was a lot of sort of definition and reshaping of the American dream during the Cold War. So these are the perspectives that are affecting, or these are the experiences that are affecting my perspective as I lead this conversation. But each of you all have your own way of coming into the American dream. Jessica, you referred specifically, for example, to your experience, as an ESL teacher, did you say? I know you say you work with ESL folks, and what you see in the parents versus the kids. And I think it's a great example of how, I don't have that experience the way that you do, but we all obviously bring these different experiences as to what shapes our sense of the American dream. So with that in mind, now that we have some idea of what each of you all thinks, what I would like us to do is to pair up for, let's say for about 4 minutes, let's say till the bottom of the hour. I want us to pair up, and I want you to take time for each other to share what's your background and experience with the American dream, kind of like the path that Jessica was starting to go down in our intros, but each of you can do so in more depth with each other. What's your background and experience with the American dream that shapes why you believe what you do about the American dream, so you can learn about where each other is coming from, because this program is about understanding, and I want us to begin to understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. Zoom's going to pair you. We will bring you back in. Thanks so much for participating in this preview. See you soon.
I guess we're getting back together. I think we're in the main room, Darlene, so I guess they're all coming to us.
Okay. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Oh, I don't know about everyone else's room, but we were so wrapped up in talking, we forgot about the countdown to bring us back in here.
That's okay. No, we were too, so it worked out great. So it was really good. So what I would like to do is,
Oh no.
well, for one, in that one-on-one exchange. Oh, is my internet unstable? I just
You cut out. Go ahead and just repeat
For a
yourself.
second, you're back now.
Okay. Was that insightful and stimulating for folks?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
getting some nods.
Absolutely.
So what would be really nice is if we open the floor and maybe you could share something you learned about the American dream and experience for it from the other person, just as a result of the conversation. And you don't even have to call out the person's name. I'll leave that up to you. But if you want to just share something you learned as a result of that conversation, that intimate exchange, that'd be great. Now, just as a sidebar, the reason I do this part, because we're in a preview program, so you kind of see for the bigger picture, if you were to do the full version, is because I think in a one-on-one intimate conversation, you dig a little deeper, you humanize the person in front of you a little more because you're not in that kind of group setting, and you get to know the story, right? You get to know the story behind the result. Like earlier when we started, we had the result. Hey, here's what I think about the American dream. but you want to see the story behind it, and you begin to understand the how and the why, so we can facilitate more understanding. So that's my little sidebar of why I'm doing that in the larger program. So for us to get a sense, let's open the door and say, what did you learn that's different or fresh about the American Dream as a result of that?
We talked about young people.
Okay.
We talked about what they think, so crossing genders, and we're much more interested in their age and what we can do so that they feel that they belong to, and it's worth voting and getting involved in community.
Yeah.
What else?
We also talked about how it was important to get outside of your similar group to experience what other people's versions of the American Dream might be. From, one of the members went to the Peace Corps, and another one taught in a school, and realized that, oh yeah, everybody's not having the same experience, and that's very beneficial.
I'll jump in because I'm the third person of that group. We also did a good job of acknowledging our privilege, right? So we each had privileges in certain ways, and how that kind of forwarded the American Dream for us, acknowledging then when we had exposure to other people's stories, how they didn't have the same privileges, right? So we each have privileges and disadvantages. So it was refreshing just to engage in a conversation with people, and just take it a step further. So I do appreciate the format. Thank you.
If I could jump in on that as a participant myself, what I learned in my conversation was, speaking of privilege and different experiences, was how someone in the same school could be sent a different message by the same teacher. So we had a situation where the teacher said that if you are of a certain race, in this case Black, then you would not be able to go to college. And this was my understanding was in a classroom that had multiple races. So what you're doing is creating this sort of hierarchy, right? And the reason that mattered for us in the American Dream, and for what I saw in it, I should say, is we did mention earlier something about opportunity in the American Dream. I see it in my earlier notes there. And that was quite literally putting a ceiling on it, right? It was the teacher trying to put a ceiling on it, in a perception at least. And that may certainly influence how someone perceives of the American Dream. Now, the good story, to finish the story in a good way though, what was really cool to hear in that story was that there were parents of other kids in the classroom that helped provide the moral support to believe that they can go to college. And so they did go to college, so which is pretty cool. So that does speak to duality of the American Dream also, right? Is that, hey, there was this obstacle, but then in this case, this group of kids also overcame it. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Another part of that I thought was really interesting was the importance and the strength of sort of generational buildup, and sometimes generational burden or generational opportunity, where even if you didn't live it, you still feel it and you feel its effects.
I'd like to jump in. We spoke at a little bit of length about the two of us each are, well, me specifically, and I heard a little bit from Rebecca as well, but is that we grew up in a kind of homogeneous situation. And so the idea of a dream or a community ideal being challenged was something that at least I didn't experience until later, or at least I wasn't aware of it, because, as I said, I was very homogeneous and a privileged situation. So when we're using a discussion of the American Dream, I'm hearing from others too, it sounds to me like there's an assumption of we all agree what that is. And when it's being offered to such and such and so, and I didn't get it or whatever, I'm not necessarily clear that of what it is that we're talking about. But anyway, that's probably more feedback than what our experience was. But we did talk about it. It was interesting, even though our backgrounds are quite different, our education levels different, our interests are different. We both came from relatively based on our cultural expectations, a relatively homogeneous situation. So therefore, the challenge was something that was new as adults.
I like the way the partner that I had talked about his parents and how his parents encouraged him to do the things that he should be doing. And yeah, I thought that was really neat.
No, since everyone jumped in.
I can share what we talked a little bit in our group. We talked a little bit about how the American dream can be used also as a control for if we think about it in America, so that we're constantly thinking about how different groups or even individuals are achieving American dreams. And then we're not thinking from a community basis, and we're not thinking about how can we really use different resources together and to think of it as more of community minding, instead of just constantly thinking materialistic if we're talking about the American dream and what we're gathering for just specific families or just a specific group. So that was one of the things we talked about.
Is it fair to say also laced in there is this notion of individualism?
Absolutely, you could say that as well.
You mentioned the families versus the kind of the more community minded, so it kind of came to my mind, and certainly that's part of some versions of the American dream, right? I think what's fascinating to me is that first we had different versions of the American dream in kind of round one, and then round two, when we kind of were digging deeper, we see why, right? Why we had different versions of the American dream. And I hope, maybe what that helps us do is next time you're having a conversation with someone about this notion of the American dream, even if they don't always use that term, but that's what kind of, we have this assumed, concept sometimes in the conversation. Maybe we can better understand where that other person is coming from if we dig a little deeper and see, well, what is it that they believe? David, to your point, what is it that they believe the American dream is? Because you may not think it's the same thing. And number two, what is their experience behind it? Why do they believe that the American dream is that particular version of it? I don't think there is one right version of the American dream. I think over 200 plus years, there have been different versions that have been developing and defined. And so, really it's an issue of understanding each other so that we can have more constructive conversations, I think. So I put some notes from this round in the chat as well. Again, substitute for putting it maybe on, on a board or something like that in real life. So before we wrap up, what I'd like to do is play a short clip from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. In the full version, when we have the full hour and a half, I would play the entire speech, because while it is something that we often think we already know, I think people, when we actually revisit it, we are often surprised to see what we find. And certainly with what we've done in this conversation, what we have in mind. And often in a longer version, we may also detour to something else and along the way. For example, when I did a previous version of this, based on the conversation that unfolded, we went to unpacking the notion of manifest destiny for Western expansion of the US, and then came back to the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. So realize that in the longer version, we may incorporate other pieces, right? Based on where the conversation goes. I hear a lot about generations and immigration and such here, and the ESL stuff that Jessica brought. And that might be a path that we go down further in the longer version before we come back to the Martin Luther King. But I like to have the last part be with the MLK I Have a Dream speech to see what themes we can connect and how that provides insight from us by revisiting an old friend, because we think we know the speech, but you forget exactly how the experience is until we revisit it. But we're in our shortened version here today, we're only going to look at a short clip, but realize in the longer version we'd look at the entire thing. So if I may share screen. Yep. Okay, great. And let me also see if I could share sound. Yep, hang on. Awesome.
100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism.
$10 can help fund powerful ads to reach undecided voters nationwide.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until that is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning.
All right, so Let me see, how do I can't stop sharing now, hang on now. There we go. So, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great, because when I did the share sound, I wasn't sure if it transferred the video, and now I'm blocked out, but, okay, so just from that brief clip, what are some phrases, words, ideas that you heard or triggered in your mind that might relate to the brief conversation that we had today regarding the themes of the American dream, and whose dream is it? And how do we define it?
I can't help but think of Kamala. And how funny that ad popped up.
I get it somehow with the talk, that's great.
But in some ways, I am really hopeful for her and hopeful for the possibility that we can have a Black woman elected to office and not just get there because the first one died. So I'm hopeful, and I think if we look at the American dream in the most generous way possible, then getting a Black woman into the highest office in the country, like, that's a dream. And we have the opportunity to make it real. So I don't know, I'm hopeful. I kind of have to be.
Yeah.
Good. Anyone else on either the ad or the speech?
Well, we have to remember that this was a march for jobs and freedom, and that Martin Luther King was much more interested in the economic inequality and trying to reach economic justice. I'm taking away the word justice and the way that he used the word justice in this little clip.
So tell me more about that. So
well, I need to go back and do it, but I've had this sense of, the opposite of poverty isn't wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And so, the notion of what can we do to bring more justice to more people? And I think that that's something that will cut across economic, racial, ethnic. It cuts across a lot of lines to kind of say, what can we do so more people, we want fewer people saying, well, it's not fair.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the economic aspect you heard in that clip too?
Well, the analogy and the metaphor of the promissory note and the bad check, that is as equally an important a statement for its time and for our time as the end, which is a wonderful aspiration as well. But he called the American people and the American nation on the carpet that said, you aspire to this, and the Black person has gotten this. Take out Black, put woman, take out.
Oh no.
Jessica said, think about all these different pieces. So as a sort of a sidebar here, remember that it's a conversation, not a lecture, and I'm building some of the details, fleshing out some of the details of where we take this conversation from the file drawer in my head, based on what your contributions are, right? So this is how it would be with the actual conversations as well. So going back to the MLK speech in the last couple of minutes here, what else jumped out to you all in the context of our conversation? Anything else?
I just want to remind us we want to leave a little bit of time for questions before noon,
Okay.
before we run over. So if I could just interject quickly, and
Sure,
then we can
that's
go
fine.
back to that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you have to hop off at noon, please, by all means, myself and Rachel and Rafi can all stay a bit. So if you'd like to continue to discuss this session, if you have more questions about the program, we'll be here. But I just want to wrap up and make sure we know that we really hope that seeing a mini version of a conversation in action tells you much more than if we talked at you about what we hoped for them. So this would be what it would be like if you requested it for your site. All three of the conversations we have now and the ones in development talk about these big picture nuanced issues and offer folks a space to discuss those issues with others. And folks may disagree in community conversations. As you saw now, we have different perspectives and probably in your small breakout groups as well. But folks have the opportunity to connect and learn from one another's perspectives. And that's really what the community conversation program is all about. We will be sending out information about how this practically works, but just couple things, if you have to hop off now, they can be in person or virtual like we're having right now, whichever suits you. And it is the same price packaging as our speakers program. So for nonprofits, it's $75 for you to host a program. And then we, Delaware Humanities, pay the rest of those costs to bring in folks like Rafi who are able to lead. So that's just very brief, practical information. We hope you enjoyed this. We hope maybe you can stay a bit because we're going to keep talking for as much as we have time. But thanks so much for being here. We will be in touch with everyone. Rafi, back to you.
No,
Well,
perfect.
I have one
No,
quick,
it's
one
great.
quick
Go ahead.
question for
As you wish.
Rebecca. One
Pat,
quick
yes,
question, Rebecca.
please.
That $75, is that going to include a toolkit or parts of things,
That
preparation
is
ahead of
for
time?
these community conversations. If you wanted to request Rafi's conversation or the other two, the
Okay.
toolkits are a separate request form and they are completely free for
Thank
everyone.
you. All right. Thank you so much.
Great.
I wanted to clarify that
Yes.
for
And we will
those of us
write
that
all
have to
this
report
down
back.
and email it to you so you don't have to remember offhand.
So go ahead. You can either share or ask Q&A. And if you got to hop off, no problem. But we're around.
How many of these have you done, Rafi?
This is a new program. So
Program. So you're experimenting with sort of, I mean, the design is excellent. It's well tested. I think it's going to be even more powerful if you do it in person.
Sure.
But the breakout, the power of the breakout room is absolutely there. We in Lewis have an opportunity for hybrid. So as we take it back to our folks, we're going to be chatting about one all online or one all on land, what might be best. But I think that, you've given us a lot to think about here.
Yeah, Pat, if I may, hybrid is fine. I typically have, in other kind of participatory programs, in my experience, I've found that all one way or all the other way works a little better. So in that case, you might consider maybe doing two versions, I don't know how that's possible.
No, I'm thinking.
Because sometimes what happens in the hybrid is
my personal opinion, I share with you.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that we have the equipment to do the hybrid, and so.
Sure. It's just I don't want someone to feel left out. Sometimes in the hybrid, I feel like one group or the other feels more left out.
I
You
agree.
know what I'm saying?
That is our experience too.
Yeah, it's tough managing those. Please know, this is a new program and we're happy to talk with our host sites to work on how this might work best. If it's a little bit of helpful context, this exact format is a brand new thing for Delaware Humanities, but some of the other state councils are running similar conversation programs, and the training that we had for Rafi and our other leaders was actually led by the executive director of Oregon Humanities. This is one of his specialties, a program they've been running there for a while that's not exactly the same, but similar in spirit. So we, the humanities councils, are very much in conversation with one another about how to make programs like this really work for people.
Can you tell us what the other two programs are and who's leading them?
Yes, and we will send them to you as well. So the other two are polarization. Can we find common ground, which will inevitably discuss political polarization, but is interested in polarization wider than that, not just the two-party system, in what people think of as polarization in society. And the other one is sitting with discomfort, self-kindness in a complicated world. And so that is led by a mental health professional who is really helping to guide folks about like, how do we think about both the issues that we live in and ourselves at the same time? How do we, that's a lot of dissonance for us. How do we navigate through that? And she leads a really emotionally powerful program. When she auditioned it for us, there were tears. We all found it to be really moving. So those are the three we have right now. We will probably have a fourth one soon. We had someone audition recently that we will be adding in, and we will be calling for more folks to train them as well and work with them on developing more topics.
And who leads the polarization one?
That's David Stradley, if folks know him, previously of Delaware Shakespeare, now with he's with Local Journalism Initiative or Spotlight Delaware. A lot of folks in Delaware know him. So that's David Stradley.
Yeah, we know him well down here. One just quick feedback. Pat and I both run discussion groups at the library, and we are challenged to do what we can to keep politics as far out of it as we can. So one little thing is to have, with all respect, we all love to see Kamala. I would just to have that jump in the middle of a presentation. Yikes. Okay, just so you might want to just make wait when you do bring it down. It's just, you know, just we can't have a political ad show up in the middle of the thing. I guarantee you in Sussex County, guarantee we'd have a complaint. It doesn't matter.
I hear you. The challenge is that I don't control the ad that comes up. I mean, that could have been anything, right? So
right. Yeah, I'm just saying that's the challenge that we face. So that's just a feedback. What you guys do with that's up to you. I don't.
We could probably help you with the setting up of the YouTube, and there may be a way to get around, you know, with the library. Okay. I don't know whether they have a subscription or not, but there may be a way to get that speech.
To do like an ad.
Oh,
I got you. So we're not doing it on YouTube. Yeah. I got you. Perfect.
We can help look into that too, because I know last time we did this, it didn't do that, but YouTube is YouTube. So we'll see if we can help.
That was a total random. But David's right. In fact, the other side of it is we've got a fairly philosophically homogeneous group here amongst us and people on the call today.
Yeah, and that's important because we have
I think one of the issues that Lewis and all of us here in Sussex have, and I'm sure you have it up in Newcastle as well, but is to try to invite and find ways to encourage more people who are of very different opinions to try to partake. I think this polarization one is of very great interest because of the way, Rebecca, that you just pitched it, which is we don't necessarily have to talk about the political polarization. We can talk about beliefs or economic, you know, there are lots
polarization
of
in a community.
Slice that, yes. Mm-hmm.
One thing on the request form for community conversations is that there is space in there where we want folks to apply to say, why do you want this? What in your community do you want to talk about? You know, are there things that's going to be too hot button for our community and we want to look at it this way? And our conversation leaders are ready and happy to think about what your community needs. You know, when Adam from Oregon came in for training, he listed off things we don't think of in Delaware. They have one issue with like wildlife management involving wolves that is such a hot button issue that you have to like put a cap on if you're talking about an environmental program. We can't mention that word because it's going to sidetrack us from what we're trying to get to. Okay. So we know, and we want to create space for this to work for you, and to work that out with the leader. Cool. That is built right into the application, and you can talk with the folks beforehand. You can talk with us. We want this to be what you need.
So I have a question. How do you guys think is best to handle? So for example, if someone feels a certain way, like I don't say anything about my politics, right? Because I want everyone to feel like they can speak regardless of what they support. But I also don't want to stop someone from expressing their beliefs if they feel a certain way, you know, because part of my point is to understand different perspectives. So regardless of what political beliefs someone expresses, I feel like I should let it sit out there, for people to consider.
I believe you should. People
So
should
I
be able
guess,
to speak without being judged.
right. So how can I make it so if someone does say something that shows their political preference, it doesn't automatically make someone else in the room who may have a different political take or preference feel like by not speaking, I'm endorsing, because I
Well,
don't mean it to be endorsing. I mean it just to have people come in the forum. Go
right.
ahead.
Two things. One, from having run discussion groups here for a number of years, two things. First one is I find myself, I need to advocate, I need to be in support of whatever the position is, whether I agree with them or not, which sometimes puts me in a funny position, but because I'm advocating for something, not advocating, but something I'm supporting something I don't believe in. And two, there's a difference between expressing your viewpoint and proselytizing. And we found that when they get to proselytizing, we do have to shut it down. Either side, even if we agree with it, we do have to shut it down. And there's a way, as I'm sure your training does, probably better than mine, there are ways to do that that are subtle and kind without having to be big jerks. But just since I just want to bring it up in the library setting, it's something we're aware of, is all.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I hear you on supporting and not proselytizing, because I feel if we're going to say we're trying to understand each other, when someone says something, regardless of what angle it's coming from, we have to kind of see how and why they believe that, right? Without dismissing it. And so
well, I think there's an opportunity here for you, and perhaps you're the expert for more than 60 miles away. So
yeah.
if you come down and run this for us, we can throw all our anger at you and you can take it away. But I do think that
that's fine.
There's, there is that option to model instead of going right into defensive mode or working from any sense of uncomfortableness you have, to say, oh, tell me, like you were just saying with me, tell me a little more. Oh,
yeah, right.
How do you understand that word? Those are the kinds of things that I think do help people work through either side of the issue,
Yep.
Definitely. And Rafi, you were in the middle of that when I cut you off to share the practical things.
Oh, that's okay.
At the end.
No.
So, in a longer version, we have much more time to do those things. I know there's only a few of us left here. I don't want folks to feel like they have to stay because a couple of us are talking.
Yeah,
so by all means, you're free to go at any time. But if you want to chat, we can stay on for another 5 minutes.
And Pat, I don't feel uncomfortable at all, because when I was in my early 20s, I was doing programs on the many uses of the Confederate battle flag since the Civil War, and talk about a big, complicated issue and all kinds of different people with perspectives.
Oh, yes.
So, and I was like in my early 20s, so I was always drawn towards these kind of contested. I love the toolkit you guys are talking about too. Rebecca was talking about earlier about contested historic sites, because I've done quite a bit of stuff on that too. So I feel like, if someone were to say something
right
politically I agree or disagree with, or something that's kind of, it doesn't throw me off. I've heard it all.
Were you invited to make a contribution to this community conversations set, or did you hear about it and say, gosh, this is a great way to put
I got in touch with Delaware Humanities just in general, and then
Rafi has done some work with other state humanity councils, and he reached out to us, and we were in the process of developing community conversations, and we said, hey, you've done some things like this at other sites. Would you be interested in attending the training and auditioning a conversation? And he said, heck yes, and here he is.
Exactly.
We're lucky to find you.
Thanks. What other questions y'all got, or comments or feedback? This is great. I like the discussion. So
back to Rebecca and Rachel, are you familiar, is the program familiar with the National Issues Forum? The handouts you have look very much like, they used to be a part of something called the Kettering Foundation out of Ohio, but they've spun out on their own. National Issues Forum, they specifically run series like this on deliberative dialogue. And it's a very similar kind of a program. But I think at the end of the day, the secret is in the design. You have a chance for some people to provide feedback in general. Then you break into small groups, and then you explore from there. I think that offers the best experience for participants. And so I think that's...
Yes, I've got that down. I mean, there are honestly many similar conversations like this, but we are working hard to provide as many resources for our conversation leaders as possible. So if those are more things we can share with them to help shape their conversations, then all the better. So thank you.
Well, I wish you well, Raffi. I think, we'll see. We can. There's a side of me that says, I wish more people would take both David's class on polarization and the being uncomfortable. We find that's where this tension comes, is that people are uncomfortable and they don't know it.
That's where the growth is, I think.
And that's where the growth is. Yeah. I know it's been brought in, people that are doing DEI work regularly now bring that into sort of little ground rules, expect to be uncomfortable. You may feel uncomfortable,
I like that.
And to kind of put that up ahead of time that says, it's okay.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's true, not just in perspectives, like we're talking about, expanding your perspectives, and understanding, but also I think intellectually. I think thinking about intellectually, how often we get trapped in only what we're interested in and what we like because it's comfortable. And I think sometimes we need to seek things that are adjacent to what you're interested in, so you kind of expand into something that maybe you didn't think you were interested in, and that discomfort is where you grow, I think, intellectually. And so that's part. And so I hear you, and I think we have to make sure that that uncomfortable part applies to people of all stripes in the room, right? It's not just on one side, right? Out of however many sides are available in the room. So I think that's so. I think what's interesting about that, Pat, is kind of has two sides, in the sense that we want everyone to feel comfortable to speak,
right?
But in the process, we also want everyone to feel uncomfortable, because there are people, different voices in the room that should feel comfortable sharing, right?
Yep.